Recording now.
Perfect. Welcome everybody to today's European virtual Marketo user group. It's so great to see some familiar faces and some new ones. Today we're going to be talking about everything email deliverability and why it's more important than you think. Before we get started, I am always honored to introduce my co-leader, Warren. For those who haven't met me yet, I'm Chloe. I'm a senior manager of marketing, operations, and analytics at Screen. And I'm excited to be joined by my co-leader, Warren Stokes, an independent consultant at Neva. Warren and I are both multi-time Marketo champions. Warren is a multi-Marketo user group leader as well. And we've been using Marketo for many years now. Warren always on the consulting side.
Yeah.
And myself more on the in-house side. Enough about us. Let's get into what we're here today for. So today's traditional user group house rules. In order for this to remain a user-focused and safe space for people to learn, network, and problem solve, we ask that everyone abide by the following rules. No self-promotion or pitching. Please don't contact people outside of the user group without their consent. And if there are any use cases that are shared today, please don't share that information, again, outside of the group without those people's consent. Let's stay connected with other mugs. If this is your first Marketo user group or multiple returning visitor, you can join up on many Marketo user groups on Bevy, mugs.marketo.com, and you can search for many of the virtual user groups that are taking place around the world now. And what are some of the upcoming opportunities for the Marketo, not just user groups, but Marketo users? There is Adobe Summit coming up end of April, the 27th to the 28th. You can register online for free at summit.adobe.com. There are tons of sessions that are available. I know there are about a dozen sessions being given by fellow Marketo champions and Marketo user group leaders. Great things in there, everything from like advanced Marketo users to beginner sessions. So go take a look and register. Next week, there's the Marketo Engage digital event, the Experience Makers Skill Exchange. This is a new event that they're doing this year, I believe. And there are a bunch of sessions. It's about a 3-hour session that's taking place next week. Again, it's free. Come join us and learn about anything and everything Marketo. And lastly, Adobe Experience Maker Awards are open. Apply now until April 30th if you so desire at adobeexperienceawards.com. The rest of this month, there are still some user group meetings that are taking place. Next week, there's Microsoft Dynamics that's meeting. There's the Twin Cities, New York, Seattle, and Houston user groups that are taking place between now and the end of the month. A new thing that we're trying out for today's user group meeting that we've learned from some other groups is for the Q&A today, rather than using the Zoom chat, we're actually going to use a neat tool called Slido.com. So if anyone has a QR scanner on their phone, you can go ahead and scan this QR code, or I'll leave that up for another second, or you can go to Slido.com and you can join as a participant using the hashtag EMEAMug. And this is what the website looks like. And you type it in there, EMEAMug, and you can type in your questions. And Warren, how does it work? It's like upvote questions.
Yeah, you can see other people's questions that are being asked, and you can upvote a question if you like it as well. We'll be sharing that in the Q&A at the end, but if there's any immediate questions as we go through it, just pop it in there.
And so Warren and I will be strategically cutting off our guest speaker for those hot topic questions to ask in the middle of the presentation. Otherwise, we will be doing a Q&A towards the end. So enough of the housekeeping. Let's get into the content today. What are we here to talk about? It is a Marketo user group, but today's topic is actually platform agnostic. It's everything about email deliverability. I just want to take a minute to kind of set the stage, let's level the playing field for everyone. This is email deliverability is a topic that many marketers rarely think about most of the time until they're confronted within a situation that's requiring their attention. They end up in people's spam boxes, or they get blocklisted. I mean, email deliverability is really complicated. There's so many nuances, there's countless factors that affect your inbox placement. And to talk more about this today, I'm actually going to ask Warren to introduce our speaker, because he's pulled some strings to get in contact with Lauren. And so, Warren, tell us about how you found Lauren today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited for Lauren to speaking today. What it was is I put a post up on LinkedIn and I was talking about email deliverability, and Lauren popped up in the comments and said, "Thanks, Warren. I enjoyed your content. I enjoyed what you put together there." And anyway, I started following Lauren's content, and the more I learned from Lauren, I was like, wow, Lauren really knows her stuff. She speaks well. So I'm really super excited to introduce Lauren, our speaker today. Over to you, Lauren.
All right, very cool. Yeah, so I think we're going to switch screens here so I can kind of just control the deck. So let me find where it is. Sorry a second, guys. I swear I had this ready to go.
You're all good.
Let me pull up the Slido. Let's see if I can get this to work.
Okay, cool. Now we're off and running. I like it. Okay, great. All right. So first of all, thank you all for joining, and thanks to Chloe and Warren for having me. It's honestly just an honor to be here. I love to talk about deliverability. As Chloe mentioned, it is incredibly complicated. There are just so many moving pieces that you really have to think about. So I'm here to hopefully help you guys just have a little bit of an understanding of what you're dealing with and kind of why you should care about this stuff, where you should care, what metrics you should be looking at, kind of all that good stuff. So I guess a little bit about me. I've been doing email deliverability email for about 14 years. I've traditionally been on the sender side. So I've been working for a couple of different ESPs throughout the years. I've also been a marketer myself. So I've sent email from lots of different sending platforms. So I've kind of just done the whole thing. I've really worked with, anything from small businesses all the way up to Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that are, those top financial and retail industries that you've, brands that you've heard of. And I guess the biggest thing that I found was that those two groups have the same kind of issues. It doesn't really matter if you are a well-known brand or someone that people have never heard of. It doesn't matter if you're sending 100 messages a week or if you're sending millions per day. Everybody kind of can have the same kind of deliverability issues if they're not focusing on the right things. And really that's kind of, just not looking like a spammer. So off we go. I'll kind of just give you a little bit of an agenda for what I plan to talk about today. So again, we're going to really start by just defining deliverability, right? What is it? What isn't it? We'll talk about the main factors that affect your inbox placement. So just to give you guys a little bit of an insight into what is going on there. We'll talk about some of those data points that you can monitor proactively to sort of catch your deliverability issues before they really become a big issue and something that's much harder to deal with. And then lastly, we'll talk about managing up. And really, this is the idea behind, there's lots of ways to manage up. There's lots of topics, but really this one is kind of making deliverability important because, deliverability is not a sexy topic. Typically, it's one that people rarely think about. And if they do think about it, it's because they're dealing with a pain point, right? So how do you make something that is typically like a cost center and a very unsexy topic sort of important within your organization? So we'll talk about that a little bit. But essentially, I think what I really want you to think about is deliverability. It's kind of like the dashboard of a plane, right? There's not just kind of one button or one lever that you can push to get you up in the air or to make you land. It really is kind of more of like it's really just, there's all these little levers and dials and things that you can kind of play with to adjust the way that you're flying, right? So deliverability is very similar in that sense, where there's so many factors that can impact whether your emails are going to land in the inbox or whether they're going to go somewhere else, right? Missing to the spam folder, who knows what. All right. So delivery rates versus deliverability. There's a lot of confusion between these two. And so I just wanted to clarify kind of what we're talking about here. Deliverability, people will often say, oh, my deliverability rate is 99%. You hear ESPs that are guaranteeing certain deliverability rates, which is kind of a little bit confusing, right? Because really what we're talking about here is a delivery rate, first of all, is an actual metric, right? And that is the quantity that you're sending, that you're attempting to send, minus the actual messages that have bounced, right? That weren't successfully delivered, divided by the total quantity, right? So in this case, you're saying, okay, well, I sent 100 messages and 99 were delivered. So my delivery rate is 99%, right? And the key there is that mailbox providers like Gmail or Hotmail or whoever else you're sending to actually give you feedback that tells you whether that message was delivered within their network or it wasn't, right? So you have facts that prove to you that something good or something bad kind of happened there. The deliverability piece on the bottom there is kind of what happens after that point, right? So it's basically once the message has been accepted into those recipient servers and they've said, yep, we got it, okay, we're going to deliver it. That from there, that's where it goes through multiple layers of anti-spam filtering and all these kind of other little places, hurdles that you're jumping over, checking the authentication, checking all these other things. And then it's delivered to either the spam folder or the inbox. And in some cases, it even goes missing. So, they accepted it into the system, they told you they received it, and then you never see it ever again, right? So Hotmail is one of the places that's very used to doing this. So the difference here is they're not sending any feedback to us that says, yep, your message was delivered to the inbox or it went to the spam folder. There's ways that we can kind of measure this through recipient engagement, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But, figure if you know that someone opened or clicked your message, you can kind of assume that it also went to their inbox or it went somewhere that they were able to see that message. But there's no feedback specifically from Gmail or Hotmail that says, yep, we got it and we sent it to the mailbox, right? So in this case, you're trying to use those engagement signals. You might be using seed testing, or often called like inbox placement testing. And those scores are really helpful to kind of try to understand, am I probably going to the inbox? But those aren't a direct connection the way that a delivery rate is. So there's a big difference there. One is very finite. There's actual factual information. The other one is kind of like, I don't know. And the problem with that is that, mailbox providers tend to hide that information, right? They don't want spammers to understand how to kind of infiltrate their system. So there's a lot of kind of black boxiness to deliverability because they're not trying to give away the secret sauce that helps them, prevent all of the bad mail that's coming in as well as the good mail. All right, so a couple of factors that impact deliverability. The big ones, and these are, we're going to kind of, not to say fly through these, but I want to move quickly because there are so many factors. This is just boiling it down to the couple that I find to be the most important, right? So your reputation. So this is at the IP level. So if you're using a shared IP or a dedicated IP, if you're, whatever domain you're sending from, so whether that's the domain that your website is hosted at, if it's a subdomain, if it's something else, both of those things, sort of have a fingerprint, if you will, right? They're attached to you in some way. People know that that's your mail, that's your IP, that's your domain. And so anything you do kind of follows your reputation, right? If you think about this like, like a kid in school, right? You can switch schools, but if you're just as bad in the new school, your reputation kind of follows you, right? So in that case, IP and domain reputation can follow you, right? Your domain will still be used if you use ESP-A or ESP-B, right? It's all kind of the same there. So making sure that you have a good IP reputation and domain reputation using tools that you can kind of check on the internet is a really helpful tool there. Authentication. So the main ones that you may have heard of are SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. I won't get too deep into those, but basically just think of these as sort of like your identification card that, like it says you are who you say you are, right? So this is a way for mailbox providers to have more confidence in the level of legitimacy of your mail, right? So you're saying, yep, this is me. My SPF tells me that these IPs are allowed to send on behalf of me. DKIM is more domain based, but again, it's kind of just saying, yes, I authorize that this is legitimate mail and it's coming from me and everything's good to go, right? So it just gives them a little bit more confidence. It's not going to say that just because you're authenticating that everything is going to go to the inbox all the time. It's just one step, one thing that you can do to help present yourself as that legitimate sender. The sending infrastructure that you're using, right? So if you're using Marketo, if you're using some other ESP or some internal MTA system, that can impact your sending as well. So figure those systems are set up, they're configured by very smart people, experts in their field who understand all of these little things, right? So there's different connection speeds and concurrent connections, right? So you can't open multiple connections within a certain ESP. There's all these different things that they've already kind of set up that are working for you. So imagine this almost like, when you go to buy a new car, you don't have to decide, how powerful, I mean, you can decide how powerful the engine's going to be, and you can kind of, customize your car, but essentially you could just buy a car and start driving, right? You don't have to think about all of the sending infrastructure that's kind of behind what makes the car actually drive. You can just drive it, right? So sending infrastructure should be kind of set up for you, but it does impact your ability to hit the inbox in some ways. Moving on to the next one, I have list collection and management bolded because this one is super, super important. When it comes to deliverability issues, I find that most of them stem from some kind of problem with your data quality. So whether that just be you're pulling in a lot of addresses that are invalid at the point of sign up, maybe you're purchasing lists or scraping them from the internet, and so the quality of those email addresses is even worse. Maybe you've got a beautifully built sign up process and it's very explicit and you're setting expectations with users, but then you kind of don't manage them very well, right? You kind of, only send to them every 6 months, or you don't really manage your hard bounces and your unsubscribes and your spam complaints very well. And so you're kind of continuing to send to people who've asked to get off the ride in some way. So those tend to be the issues that cause lots of hard bounces, so invalid addresses, which can hurt deliverability, but also spam complaints, right? So anytime a recipient, whether they signed up or not, if they are not expecting to hear from you, if they don't like the content that you're sending, if you send too often or not often enough, if they're in a bad mood because they spilled their coffee, I don't know, it doesn't matter. They have the likelihood of marking your mail as spam, which is probably one of the most damaging ways that you can affect your deliverability. So just to really focus on having a list of people who want to be there, who have hopefully signed up. But yeah, just really consider that if you have a deliverability issue, it could be something simple. It's probably something to do with the people that you're sending to and them not liking the mail or not being able to receive the mail. So, really data quality is super important. And then lastly, content. There's a lot of kind of, talk within the industry of like, content matters. And if you use words like free in the subject line, that's going to immediately land you in the spam folder. It's not the truth, right? There are certain cases, like, for example, I think it's free.de, who is it? I think it's free, but there's a provider in Europe that they actually, when the mail goes, when you have an emoji in your subject line, that will send it to the spam folder, right? So a very specific case, but typically it's more the reaction of the user. So you could use free all day long as what you're giving away is free. But if you're giving away something that's free with $100 purchase, figure by the time the person opens the mail and is like, woohoo, something's free, and then they find out they have to pay money, that's going to kind of raise their expectations in a good way and then just set them up for a big fall, right? And so in that case, they might mark your mail as spam. So it really is kind of like that setting of expectations that's super important when it comes to content, right? If you have a very vague, subject line that's just kind of like, hey, check this out, people are going to open it a lot more than they would if it's something very specific that says, buy jeans for $25 here, right? If they don't want jeans, they're not going to buy that. But if it's something kind of vague, there are times where they might open it, but then they're like, this is not what I wanted. And in fact, this is very annoying. And so then their reaction might change from a positive impact to a negative one. So that's where the content really comes into play there for the most part.
That's
all right. So moving on.
Lauren, I'm going to
sure.
I'm going to hop in. I have some questions about this slide here. These
definitely
brings up so many emotions, positive and negative.
Right.
Content, huge, list management, from events. When you attend events and you get that Excel sheet of all the events and your marketing team wants to import it, and you don't have their explicit opt-in, it's just, there's a lot of gray zone there. But specific question I have from personal experience is back up to point number 1, reputation and IP. So shared IP, dedicated IP, should I stay? Should I go? What are the benefits? When should we stay? What advice would you give to a company or to an individual if they're what company they're at? When should they stay shared? Let's dive a little bit into that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And, so the main 2 options for people are that shared IP where, you've got anywhere from a couple of senders to hundreds of different senders that are all sharing kind of like one space. So let's kind of think of that as like the city bus. And whereas the dedicated IP is you owning your own car, right? So the dedicated IP, the biggest benefit is essentially you're you're able to separate yourself from all the other people on the city bus, right? So it helps you identify yourself as a sender. So if you have good practices, then all of a sudden you don't have to worry about maybe somebody who's on your shared range that's maybe doing something that's a little spammy. So that could result in a block listing on the IP. It could result in, just some sort of reputation issue that's not your fault, but you're being punished, if you will, because you're on that shared space with them. So think about this, like, if you're on that city bus, all it takes is really just kind of one smelly guy to really ruin the experience for everybody. So most ESPs do a really, really good job of trying to kind of police their networks and, making sure that if there is a blacklisting that happens, if there's any kind of lacking in performance, they identify the sender on that shared range and they try to kind of, educate them to improve, or they kind of kick them off the platform or kick them off the shared IP. But yeah, so when you're on shared, it's really helpful if you don't send very often, right? Because in order to maintain an IP reputation, you need to send frequently, right? They're really only looking at about a 30-day window of time to see, okay, well, when they sent in the past, were they a good sender? Were they a bad sender? Did our users like the mail? Did they not? So if you only send once a month or once a quarter with quarterly statements or something, that could be a really good reason to stay on a shared IP. Or if your volume is just kind of very small, you haven't gotten to that point where you're sending a whole bunch of volume, you don't have a lot of recipients yet, the shared IP can, all of those kind of group people can kind of just amass to help you have a sender reputation that ISPs can kind of track. Whereas, yeah, that dedicated IP is more for, people who are sending more volume, sending more regularly, their programs are a little bit more a little bit more complex, perhaps. The other reason you might need a dedicated IP is if you have, let's say if it's a financial institution that has some kind of legal requirement that sort of needs to protect their data from other people. In those cases, you might also need a dedicated IP, even if you're kind of a small sender. But yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, there's a quick question from Adele in the audience, which is what reputation monitoring tools would you recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I think there's two main. So if you're sending to the big mailbox providers like Gmail and Hotmail and those ones, there's a couple of tools that I would recommend. So Google Postmaster tools is one. So basically, you need to enter a little record within the domain that you're sending from and kind of set it up. But once it's set up, basically Google will tell you what they think of your sender reputation. So they've got 4 different categories. It's high, medium, low, or bad. And so figure, even if you're not sending a lot to Gmail, they are very sophisticated. They know what they're doing. So that rating, that information might help you understand a deliverability issue, even within a different network, because they just give you enough details to kind of understand sort of, how they feel about your mail. Another one is from Microsoft. So this is called Snds. And that is essentially another tool that you kind of need to plug yourself into. And that's an IP-based tool. But that one also kind of has like a green, yellow, red rating scale, which they use as kind of like their filtering results. So that is, it's not an exact science, but essentially that's giving you information to sort of know, if it's green, we expect the mail to probably go to the inbox. If it's yellow, maybe some's going to go to the spam folder. You might be a little bit at risk. If it's red, chances are you might have more mail go to the spam folder. So those two are great ones. There's also a couple of kind of like third-party block list checkers that I would recommend. So MX Toolbox is one, and there's also another one called like it's like valley.rbl.net, I think. But both of those tools, if you kind of just Google even just, multi-RBL, basically those are looking for rolling block lists. And so in that sense, these are tools that they have pulled together, the hundreds of blacklists and block lists that matter. And then you can just pop in your domain or your IP, and then it runs through all of those different lists. And if you're listed on anything, it'll kind of give you some next steps in terms of like how you can remove the block. Does this, in a sense, almost does this block list matter? Because not all block lists matter, right? Maybe you guys have heard of Spam House or Spam Cop or ones like that, Proofpoint or Cloudmark. But there's other ones, even Sorbs, for example. There's one that a lot of people end up on this block list called Sorbs, but it really does not impact B2C senders very often because Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, those providers don't really care about the listing from Sorbs. They're like, yeah, we get it. You're saying it's spam, but we don't really care, right? So not every listing affects you the same way, but you can double check to see, am I listed anywhere? And then they'll kind of tell you what drives that listing. So typically the listings are driven by either spam trap hits or user complaints. So using those kind of little bits of information from all of these networks can help you kind of pull together a bigger picture of like, am I a good sender in most people's eyes? Am I a bad sender? Are there is there evidence that I need to improve something or not?
Awesome. I hope that answers your question, Adele. I'm not going to call you Adele again, but anyway.
Yeah.
There's another question related to this slide, actually. There's some bigger questions that have come in as well, but we'll save that to the end Q&A. But is the best place to test subject lines from Chris?
Yeah, so subject line testing, it really depends. I mean, some ESPs, you can do it right within there. There are some third-party tools. None of them are really coming to mind, but honestly, if you Google subject line testing, a lot of times, like the best, well, a lot of these tools will just do like an A/B test, right? So you have an option of subject line A, subject line B, and that's really as far as they go. But there's evidence, and I think Delaquist is one of the guys. So if you haven't heard of Delaquist, Google him and check him out, because he is a very intelligent guy. But he has this method where his thing is, look at the subject line in, test 5 or 6 different options, and keep in mind that when you're doing those subject line tests, you don't want to just focus on the one that wins and gets the most people to open, but also consider, once they open that mail, is that subject line also going to set them up to want to follow that call to action that you have within the email, right? So again, maybe the most winning subject line is something that's very generic and it gets a lot of people to open in your test. But then if those opens translate to people being like, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, bummer, they're not going to convert. Whereas if your subject line is a little bit more specific, a little bit more driven by the call to action that you're looking for them to take, that will have lower opens, but it might actually lead to a higher conversion rate, because it's just much more specific to your needs. So yeah, so check that out. There's a lot of tools out there. I don't have any that I personally recommend, but just make sure you're kind of doing some of those tests, just to kind of see, is there a better approach that you can be taking for your email program?
Awesome.
All right. Shall we move on to the next slide?
Let's go.
All right, let's do it. Cool. All right. So this one, I know marketing operations people kind of love funnels, so I wanted to include a funnel just for the fun of it. But really, this to me speaks to really why deliverability is so important, why you guys should care about it. First of all, it's a whole lot harder to get yourself, it's a whole lot harder to dig yourself out of the spam folder than it is to just stay in the inbox, right? Once you've got mail that's going to spam, you really need to take action. You need to improve your practices in some way, get the recipients reacting the right way. So it really is, you want to stay in the inbox, because once you start having deliverability issues, it's a little bit of a painful slope. So I think that, it's key to just remember that as we go through this, it's kind of like a step-by-step process, right? You need to have a quality opt-in acquisition source. If you don't build that database, that's full of people who really want to be there, who want to engage with your email program, that's going to be a problem, right? And if you're having a lot of hard bounce, right? So again, if you're purchasing lists, if you just have a acquisition process that's pulling in a lot of typoed addresses, that is going to impact your database quality, right? So figure if your database is not very, very high quality, that's going to impact your delivery rates, right? So if you're having lots of hard bounces, that's going to impact your sender reputation. It's going to mean you're contacting less people. So you got to get to the delivery rate, in order to have any kind of success with email. But in order for people to continue, you have to get them to keep going down the funnel, right? So the delivery rate, great. Now you need to have them open the mail if you want them to continue down, right? And then go to the click-through rate and then the conversion rate. So figure, it's super important to kind of just consider your entire program when you're setting things up, because, you could have a very high quality database and it's leading to lots of opens. But if people don't continue down that funnel, right? If you're getting people to open, but they're opening and never ever clicking through, never converting to anything, then your database really isn't as quality as you think. So it really is just, I want you to think about this as we kind of jump into some of the metrics that I'll show on the next screen that I want you guys to be focusing on. It really is important to just consider everything, right? It's not just about the opens. It's not just about the delivery rates. It's about getting people to take whatever action you wanted them to take with email, to engage with that email positively. So as we go through, okay, so here's some metrics that I really think you guys should be monitoring. Maybe you already are, which is great, but think about this from a deliverability perspective, right? So I think you'll see that I've got some targets listed for each of these. And so as we walk through, just keep in mind, I know that there are tons of people from different industries here, and you're sending all kinds of different mail. So figure a marketing newsletter might have an open rate that's around 20%, whereas a transactional mail might have, or we might expect that open rate to be more like a 75 or 80 or 90%, right? So this target that I'm showing you for each of these is meant to kind of say, keep your results within line here to avoid deliverability issues. It's not to say that that's going to mean you optimize your program. It really is just to avoid having your mail go to the spam folder because you're having an issue there, right? So, so the first one is bounces. So we'll talk about that. There's two different main kinds of bounces, right? There's the hard bounces that are mainly focused on, list collection and management issues, right? So I kind of mentioned this before. So it really is just if you're pulling in invalid addresses or if you're kind of just not managing your list really well. The soft bounces are the ones that tend to be driven by sender reputation. So figure that somebody saying you're blocked because you're on a block list, or your mail looks like it's really spammy or something like that, right? So that tends to be the soft bounce, as well as just a transient failure, right? If you're trying to send to Yahoo and they just are having a bad day and their servers are down for a few minutes when you tried to send, that might result in kind of a transient failure, and you can retry that. But essentially, there's those two types of bounces. And the key here is you want your bounce rates to stay below like a 2 to 3% range. And so figure that translates to a delivery rate that's like 97 or 98%, which is, really, really high. But figure, if you're hitting hard bounces that are 3 or 4 or 5%, that is going to be a call out for a mailbox provider that you have a list collection issue. If you have a high rate of soft bounces, right, that means that you have a deliverability issue that you need to dig into. So either way, pay attention to those bounces if they're at all kind of above that 2 to 3% range. Open rates, and I would say also click-through rates, are really those things that indicate to people that, or indicate to you that recipients like the content that you're sending. There's something about that's interesting them, which is a great sign. When your open rates are low, though, for example, that could be two different things, right? That could just be that people don't really care about your mail. They're not interested. It's just kind of like boring to them. The other thing could just be that this is a sign of a deliverability issue. So one thing to look into is the domain level open rates, right? So if you can see that your open rate at Gmail and Hotmail and all the other destinations you send to is 30%, but then when you look at Yahoo, it's 6% or 10%, that's a pretty good indication that the mail is probably going to the spam folder. Because figure you're probably targeting all of those audiences the same way, right? You're not having a special segmentation for Yahoo that means that it should perform worse. So if you see something that's kind of low, it's not kind of within line with the others, that could be a call out for a deliverability issue. So, really dig into those stats. Even sometimes you have to download an Excel document. I wish it was easier in some ESPs, but try to get at that granular level of the domains if you can. And here the deliverability target is just stay above 20%. Again, if you're sending transactional mail, that needs to be a lot higher. I would shoot for like 75 or 80%. But really, the key here is, when you get to a 5 or a 10% open rate figure, think about that from the other side. That means that 90 or 95% of the people that you're sending to don't open your mail. That's going to look pretty bad to a mailbox provider. They're going to say, it looks like you're pulling in people who don't care, or you're just sending to everyone in your audience. Both ways that could be bad for deliverability. So keep it above 20%, no matter what kind of volume you're sending or what kind of mail stream you're sending. Click-through rates, those ones, I think, I've heard some people ask questions of like, my content is good, people love it, but my click-through rates are failing. So that's a deliverability issue. It's not a deliverability issue. Figure people cannot click through if, people cannot open if the mail is not in their inbox, right? So if you've got an open and then the engagement kind of falls off when you get to that click-through rate, that's actually a problem with your content, right? Because there's something that compelled the person to open, but then when they got there, they're like, this isn't good. I don't like this, right? So so if you're having issues with your click-through rates, focus in on how you can kind of optimize that content to get people to click, change your calls to action, perhaps to try to make them a little bit clearer or a little bit more enticing for people. All right. I want to talk a little bit about negative reactions as well. So we just focused on some kind of more positive ones, opens and click-throughs, but really also focus on your spam complaints and your unsubscribes as well, because these are signs of people who want to get off the ride for whatever reason. So again, maybe they did sign up for your list. Maybe they didn't. Mailbox providers can't tell if there was an opt-in. All they can see is now that person that you're sending to marked the mail as spam, right? So this can help you identify a lot of different kind of issues. So it's, the initial trigger would be, oh, my spam complaint rate is high. then there's a bunch of things that you probably want to look into, kind of figure out, is this an issue with your list collection or management? Is it something with targeting where you're sending them way too much mail, or again, not enough mail? Is it something with the content where they just really are not connecting with whatever they thought they were signing up for? So get to the bottom of kind of the why. But the big difference I want to call out here is that spam complaints have a very, very, very big impact on deliverability, right? These are such a clear indication to a mailbox provider that someone doesn't like the mail, right? And they are trying to make their users happy, right? A Gmail user who's not happy might go to Yahoo or someone else. So Gmail is trying very hard to make that experience really, really positive in their inbox. And so, they take those spam complaints very, very seriously. Whereas on the other side, the unsubscribes have a pretty minimal impact on deliverability. Honestly, unsubscribes are a good thing, and you should see that way, because it's giving people the opportunity to get off your list without marking your message as spam. And it's also just helping you learn what content's good or what is bad, right? If you've got multiple types of campaigns or newsletters that you're sending, or types of mail streams, and one has a really high spam complaint rate or unsubscribe rate compared to the others, look into that, figure out what that reason is why that's high. Maybe it is just that it's the first message they receive. So then you can focus on improving your sign-up process and better setting expectations about what they're going to receive. If it's something later down the line, figure out, is it a certain offer that they just hated? What is it, right? So I think there's different signals you can use there. Spam complaints, I would say, keep those rates incredibly low. I'm sure within most ESPs, they're allowing you to kind of have a spam complaint rate that's a lot higher. Let's say it's like 0.1% or even 0.2%. And that's still a very small percentage of your list, but just figure, if we're talking about inbox placement, you want to keep it much lower than what your ESP allows, because figure at that point when the ESP says 0.1 is the highest you can go, that's the point when they intervene. That's the point when they start rate limiting your account and trying to dig into why you're having high complaint rates. So keep it well below that. For me, I would say, 0.02, 0.03 range is what you want to focus on for inbox placement. All right, so a couple other data points, and we kind of mentioned a couple of these already, thanks to a great question from someone in the audience, but I'll just call it a couple of other data points. So use these in tandem with your metrics, right? And with the metrics, I'm going to go back really just for a second and say, make sure you're monitoring these over time, right? It's nice to look at a certain campaign and say, oh, this one had a high open rate, but it really is much better to kind of track those different mail streams over time, right? See, what is your typical open rate? Is that trending upwards? Is it trending downwards? Is it staying the same? Are your spam complaints kind of chugging along, and then all of a sudden there was a big spike? So really look at those trends to be able to kind of figure out, sort of what looks different, right? That's what we're really looking for here, is just kind of like what calls out as not fitting in with the rest of this stuff, right? So you want to use all of these metrics. Look at them all. Don't just focus on the opens or the click-throughs. Look at all of these, but look at them over time as well. All right, so now onto the data points, excuse me for that. And so these really, again, look at your metrics, but then if you are having bounces, dig into those, right? We talked about hard versus soft bounces. So figure out, what are you dealing with? Is this an invalid address issue that you can fix by improving your list collection practices, or I don't know, maybe moving to a confirmed opt-in process or using real-time verification, things like that. If you're having soft bounces, where are they, right? Are you blocked at Gmail? Are you blocked at Hotmail? Are you blocked at all of those destinations? Is that bounce message telling you that you're on a block list? Because then that's actionable insight that you can kind of use to go figure that out. Do they tell you that it's for policy issues, which your ESP could help you kind of figure out what that issue is about? So dig into those bounces to try to just understand a little bit more about kind of what's driving your issue there. We talked about the Postmaster data feeds, so I won't mention too much more. I didn't say anything about feedback loops in the past. These are essentially just a way for a mailbox provider to kind of give you, feedback that tells you when someone marks messages as spam. So Gmail doesn't really offer a formal version of this, but all the other big mailbox providers basically do. So let's say if you're a Hotmail user and you mark your message as spam, Hotmail is going to let that, follow that back to the ESP and say, hey, ESP, I wanted to let you know that Lauren at Hotmail has marked this message as spam, right? So it's just a way for you to understand, again, within a certain network, are you having high complaint rates? Are you having issues where Google Postmaster has, gives you a bad sender reputation or something like that? So check that out. We also talked about the block listings. And so I gave you a couple of tools for that. And these really, they aren't always going to drive your mail to the spam folder. I would say if you're blocked at Spam House, take it incredibly seriously. That could get you blocked at, 65% of your mail could end up being blocked there because they are very credible in the industry. And so a lot of mailbox providers trust the information that comes from Spam House. So if they say you're spam, everybody else kind of follows that and says, oh, yep, they're spam, don't accept that. Whereas the further you move down to less and less well-known block lists, they have less impact. So really kind of dig into not just where you're listed, the impact that it has, but also how do you get off that list, right? So understand, is it driven by spam trap hits? Is it driven by user complaints? Is it driven by something else, such as an authentication issue that the block list is calling out? So I think this is where it's a little, you don't need to understand what all of this stuff means, but hopefully find a deliverability expert or friend who has a little bit of email experience, or work with your ESP to just get a little bit of insight when you're kind of like, I don't really get this. Like I have this information, but I don't know what to do with it. There's lots of us that are here to help you. There's also a group called Email Geeks. It's a Slack channel. I'll mention that. It's a membership driven thing, but it's free. So you basically just have to kind of ask to be a part of the group. So just Google Email Geeks Slack. And that's a community with, I think they've got 10,000 people in there at this point. You could throw a bounce message or a block listing or something in there that you don't even have to say where you work, and just say, hey, I'm seeing this thing. Can somebody help me understand what this is? And that would just be some free advice for you to have. So yeah, definitely check that out. If you have access to spam trap hit data, either through a third-party monitoring tool like Validity or Kickbox or one of those companies, or if you're just getting blocklisted and the blocklist is telling you this was driven by spam trap hits, either way, you know that you've got a spam trap issue, right? So we won't dig too deep into what spam traps are, but essentially these are meant to call out issues with list collection, list management, basically people that are kind of doing things the wrong way with emails. So a spam trap is a type of address that's never actually signed up for your email program, right? So there's typo traps that are just kind of, Gmail spelled wrong, things like that. There's a recycled trap that is, kind of people who signed up for your list, but then maybe you didn't mail them for a year or 2 or 3, and now you're kind of trying to recontact them. And at that point, the address has kind of already been closed and it's kind of turned into a recycled spam trap. So it's kind of like, hey, this is really old. Why are you sending to this? And then there's a pristine trap, which is one of those that never, ever signs up for any mail. It's never been used for anything. It's just kind of inserted on the internet somewhere and waits for somebody to come along and pick it up and try to send mail to it. So if you're hitting traps, go check out your list collection and your management issues. But I would say try to get some help to understand what your best options are there for improving that. And then the last thing you should check is recipient or your ESP feedback, right? So if you're getting contacted by recipients who say your mail is missing, it's going to the spam folder, whatever, use that information, try to troubleshoot around that. If you're getting data from your ESP, it could be them saying, hey, your spam complaint rates are high, you're in trouble with compliance. It could just be them kind of giving you a little bit of a, hey, your performance looks a little bit worse, or we noticed that your delivery rates are slipping or something like that. So if you get that kind of feedback, just take it constructively. Don't assume that they're trying to kind of, to mess with you, or they're trying to ruin your day, or they're trying to get you in trouble. It's not that. Their goal is to protect their platform, but they're also there to help you be a better email sender. So I think that's where, with that ESP feedback, make sure that you really just, use it for constructive things. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I want to kind of jump into the managing up stuff next. So, but I wanted to kind of pause and see if we had any questions before we moved on.
There's a question come in. It's a bigger question. But okay. Chris has asked, understanding there are many moving parts, can you identify any silver bullet to increase deliverability if you had to tag it from a high level?
Right. Yeah. So unfortunately, there's no silver bullets to deliverability, I would say. I really wish there were. It's the actual silver bullet to deliverability, I would say, is getting opt-in from people before you send mail to them and following the signals that tell you if they like the mail or not. And I know that's not really a silver bullet at all, but essentially the way to game the system with deliverability is to show as much positive engagement from your users as possible. So figure things like opens and clicks, if they're, things that you can't see, but if they're dragging your messages to a folder to save for later, or if they're forwarding it on to friends, or they're starring it as important, they're adding you to their address book. All these things are kind of positive signals that tells the mailbox provider that they like the mail that's coming from you. And you want to try at the same time, limit the negative reactions. So anybody who might be marking as spam, make that unsubscribe process incredibly easy to limit the spam complaint rates. But really, yeah, focus on those signals. Figure the other ones you can't see might be if they delete your mail without ever opening it, if they just let it sink to the bottom of their inbox, if they drag it to the spam folder. All of these things are kind of negative signals. So it really, it's all about kind of the algorithms, because you're not talking to a guy, right? There's not Bob at Gmail that's sitting in the basement somewhere. It really is just an algorithm that's kind of saying, these are the things that I see as good. These are the things that I see as bad or potentially dangerous for my network, right? So it's all about kind of proving to the algorithm that you are a very good sender through the stats that they're generating. So it's not a shortcut, but think about that. Think about just making your users really happy, but the more that you can get them to engage, the more mailbox providers are going to say, oh yeah, this looks good. And that's really going to help you with your inbox placement over time.
Cool. I hope that answered your question, Chris. Okay.
All right, cool. So making a case to your business team. So honestly, this is where I kind of try to bring it all together, because, we talked a lot about deliverability stuff and what you can monitor. But essentially, if you're never able to kind of, make improvements to your email program, if you're not able to kind of do this stuff, that's going to be a problem, right? That's really going to hurt you in the long run. And, a couple of things just to keep in mind with email, email has an incredible return on investment. The average is about $42 to every $1 that's spent, right? This is like anywhere from, 4 to 10 times higher than most other digital channels. So you have that kind of stuff going for you, right? And, there's further evidence to show that, even if you're not, even if your email recipients aren't opening or clicking or engaging with your mail, simply by you hitting their inbox and them seeing that mail, seeing your brand from time to time, that can increase the amount of money that they spend or the amount of times that they kind of convert with your brand. But if you're not going to the inbox, none of that matters, right? So I think this is one of those where, it really is important for you to make that case to your management of like I said before, it's a lot easier to stay in the inbox than it is to go to the spam folder and then dig yourself out. So, think about that. You really want to kind of get proactive with this stuff and find ways to talk to your leadership that's really going to kind of connect the dots, right? And that's where, I am a deliverability person who's kind of always sort of that, think about it. I'm like, oh, well, don't do those bad practices or you're going to go to spam or you're going to get blocked, right? It reminds me of kind of, that whole thing where people say, don't smoke cigarettes and don't eat bad foods, right? Eat healthy and be, drink as little alcohol as you can. All this stuff is really good for not getting cancer, right? But people still smoke, people still drink, people still treat their bodies in bad ways because they don't really see that as like an imminent threat, right? They're kind of like, well, yeah, I could get cancer, but like they don't really think about that, right? So inbox placement is kind of like that, where people are like, yeah, I could go to the spam folder, but that's not going to happen to me, right? I'm a good sender. I'm a well-known brand. So, you can talk about all of these other things when you're trying to make that business case for some kind of improvement to say it's going to improve our data quality or engagement, it's going to improve our deliverability, but that is such a black box kind of comment that it doesn't really have any impact with people. So I think really, what you want to focus on is this one at the far right, which is how is the change that you're proposing going to increase ROI from the email channel? How is it going to increase profits for the business? How is it going to improve their margins in some way, shape, or form, right? So as we move through this, I think I want you to think about this as sort of like a brainstorming exercise, and you want to get as creative as possible, right? Cast your net as wide as you can, and really just think about all of the potential butterfly effects of whatever change you're proposing, right? So, and again, this could be something that's directly related to your sign up process or the targeting that you use for email, or it could just be something that's happening downstream on your website or upstream somewhere else. But consider, will the action that you're recommending lead to more purchases or higher conversion rates, right? You can talk about quality over quantity here and things like that, but essentially you really want to kind of focus on the numbers, right? Because if your CMO or whoever else found out that, an active participant on your list is actually worth, $1 versus an inactive who's worth 5 cents, and you're mailing to them the same amount of time, I think that would be pretty compelling to say, oh, maybe we should kind of adjust that because we're having deliverability issues. Let's stop mailing to those 5 cents people and focus on the dollars, right? So figure out ways that you can kind of adjust those scales a bit. You might want to consider, if this is going to increase the spending, right? Are they going to get stickier with your brand in some way? Are they going to, I don't know, just think about ways that you could kind of, upgrade them, optimize that spend. Also think about if you could reduce the costs with email. And here I'm specifically talking about things like email verification, or if you have to hire a consultant to help you clean up a deliverability issue, right? Email verification, for example, can cost you thousands and thousands of dollars per year. So that alone could be a huge cost savings for your brand because you're just not having to spend that time, right? How is it going to reduce operating costs? And so here, think about the workload of your support staff and your customer success managers and anybody who might have to be involved in cleaning up a mess, right? If you've got mail that's going to the spam folder and it's password resets, or it's, I don't know, movie tickets or something like that, people are going to start complaining, right? So they're going to start calling your support team. There might be a flood of support tickets. You might start to see people bleeding onto social media and complaining, which can impact your brand reputation. So, there's that brand reputation impact, but mainly, what is that going to cost, right? So, when I was working for an ESP, if we had a bad day and support had to work overtime, that's really expensive, right? They're getting time and a half. There's a lot of things to consider there. So really, again, think about that, right? If you could hire less customer success managers or less deliverability consultants or whatever that is, if you can save money, you could maybe shift that budget over to the thing that you're proposing, or again, just find ways to kind of reduce those costs for the business. And then again, with the unforeseen and hidden costs, I think there's ones that people don't think about with deliverability issues, such as the time that you're actually going to spend trying to mitigate that issue with the mailbox provider itself, right? So if you're blocked at Hotmail, that can be a very, very time-consuming process. But also you might have to work with your ESP, right? If you're in hot water with them, if you're rate limited or something like that, that is a lot of time that you're spending and a lot of frustration that you're dealing with as you're working through that. Again, you might have those customer complaints. So you really want to kind of focus on all of those potential issues, right? So especially if you're kind of, if your boss is like, hey, let's purchase a list, that won't be so bad, right? Maybe even remind them, hey, if we get suspended from our ESP because they've already warned us twice, we're going to have to also go find another ESP. So there's the time vetting a new ESP. There's all that time and energy that's spent with the migration. There's the deliverability issues that can come with moving to a new environment, all this kind of stuff, right? So consider those hidden costs, and try to make that case, but really make it as business focused and as revenue or number driven as possible, right? Really, use that to kind of grease the wheels a bit. All right, and I think a couple other things I just want to call out very quickly. I guess I think we're good. Actually, we'll move on. Okay, so managing up. I also wanted to talk about not just like, hey, I have this thing that might cost some money, but also, how do you veto like those great ideas that come from leadership sometimes, where again they say, hey, let's send to the entire audience, even though we haven't contacted some of these people in months or whatever. So it's really important to be able to say no, right? And say no in a way that doesn't impact your relationship with the people that you work with, that doesn't kind of lose credibility for you, and also makes you seem open to business, right? And having a business mind. So a couple of winning strategies that have worked for me in the past are, again, leading with facts, bringing numbers to the conversation, really focusing in on that amount of money that you can make for the business or save for the business. That's always going to help. You can document past ideas. A company that I worked for actually had, a really just nice running of like, hey, we ran this test last year. We did this proof of concept a couple of months ago. And then the results, right? It could just be as simple as this one was a success, this was a failure, but some notes just to kind of say, hey, Steve, we tried this a couple of months ago. It didn't work well. So if nothing else, if you're trying it again, you can learn from the past, remember what happened last time, and try something different so that hopefully you have a more successful outcome. So just keeping in mind that historical aspect of kind of what's going on. And same thing as well, you could create a formal submission process that gives you help for new ideas, right? So make them think about what the business impact is. Does this help one customer who doesn't spend a lot of money with us? Does this help almost every single customer that we care about? What is the priority that this should have? An outline of the idea, of course, and make them, again, think about what does this actually look like? What is this going to involve? Who needs to be involved in this decision? What are the key stakeholders? All that stuff just helps them make it a better idea before it comes to you. It's not just in a meeting. It's like, woo, go do that, right? It's a little bit more thought behind that. And then maintain close relationships with your managers and your leadership team when possible, because This makes it more likely that you're going to feel comfortable to speak up when something doesn't feel right to you. You're going to feel more assertive to voice your concerns in a clear way, right? And if that feedback is, hey, I'm saying no to this, the better your relationship is, the more open they're going to be with that feedback. So, that's one of those, just try your best over time to have a good rapport with your managers and your leadership team so that they can trust you as an expert who they should listen to, right? And then things to avoid, try not to get emotional or angry. Try to give people the space to to share their idea, ask some thoughtful questions, make sure you truly understand it before shutting it down, because if you dismiss it too soon, they're going to say, you're not even listening to me, right? So that hurts your reputation. They're going to think that you're just emotional or angry. So instead, stick to those facts, try to stay calm and collected. Don't use scare tactics if you have actual facts. Like, yes, the scare tactic can help, but really people are just going to roll their eyes. So to try to stick to the actual data at hand. Focusing on the problems with the idea is something you want to avoid. Really try to understand, how could this work, right? I don't like your idea because I see some problems, but you can share those problems, but share also a solution to those problems, right? So if you're saying, I understand you want to grow your list really quickly, but I think purchasing a list is the wrong way to do it, here are some other options, right? So don't just come to say no, find ways that you could potentially say yes with a modified version of that plan. And that could help other people understand, oh, okay, oh, I see why you have a problem with this. Okay, cool. So maybe that will help. And then also waiting too long to speak up is something to avoid. And this is one of those, I know it's awkward. You don't want to say no. You don't want to shut them down too soon. But at the same time, if you wait until the wheels are really turning for that project, and there's lots of people who've spent time thinking about it, spent time working on it, maybe even developing something, that's going to be really hard to kind of pump the brakes and get them to kind of course correct. So really just try to speak up at the first opportunity that you feel comfortable, that you feel like you have enough information to really kind of set that up. So yeah. All right. That's pretty much all I have for you guys today. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you have, but thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you guys about deliverability.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lauren, for that. There was one more quick question that came in. It did actually come in the beginning, but I think it's a bigger one. What's your recommendation, RE, reputation when you start using a new ESP?
I guess, what do you mean in terms of what's my right, like how to build the reputation? Is that one question?
I mean,
Okay.
I'm unmuted. Someone asked that anonymously in Slido, so.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like when you're switching, I mean, consider, even if you have an internet reputation, you're moving to a new location, right? So you have a new IP, maybe even a new sending domain, a new ESP that you're sending from. ISPs, mailbox providers, need time to adjust to that change. They are going to say, hey, we saw that you were sending from Marketo before, and now you're sending from some other platform. Is that really you, or is that a spammer who's pretending to be you? Is that some malicious volume that's not actually you, right? So they want to make sure that it's actually legitimate mail coming from you. So that's where authentication is a must when you're switching. Just set yourself up and then go very slowly, right? Start sending very small volumes. If you can kind of rely on both ESPs during that transition to kind of say, to send a lot of the volume through your past ESP and build that reputation very slowly, that helps, because figure it's kind of like you dipping your toe in the water for a mailbox provider, right? You're kind of saying, hey, here's who I am, and I just wanted to introduce myself. And the more mail you can send that has, again, those really good recipient reactions, right? So try to find audiences that are going to engage positively, right? Opens, clicks, things like that, and not mark your mail as spam, right? So if you're moving over lots of different mail streams, try to avoid like the brand new users or those inactives who potentially haven't heard from you in a very long time. So really a focus on the best audience first. And then just, yeah, try to shed whatever bad practices you have from the past ESP, focus on being a better version of yourself as you kind of introduce yourself to that new IP or domain.
I hope that answers the question you asked that anonymously. If you want any further clarification, feel free to chime in.
Yeah.
And I think there was another question from Rob. Has anyone used Redshift?
Yeah. Sure. We're looking at Redshift, Valley Mail, these kind of platforms. It's slightly bigger than just Marketo. We're kind of looking at all our systems.
Right.
And it's a really interesting exercise. We're going through it at the moment. And I wanted to know if anyone had any experiences. One of the things that was quite interesting was the difference they pointed out between SPF and DKIM authentication, because, God, I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's SPF. If you authenticate things like PR web on SPF, you've authenticated anyone spamming you from PR web, and they're saying, oh, you should use DKIM, and that's something that I think isn't always clear in Marketo documentation and just generally in email land.
Yeah, and anyone who has specific experience with Redshift, please speak up, because I don't personally, but I know there's a lot of providers on the market, right? So there's Dmartian, there's Agari, there's Valleymail, there's all these providers, and really I would say they're all great. I know people who work for all of them, they're all very helpful. I think it's more just there's a different kind of a different price point for some of those different services, and there's also just a little bit of a different approach to the way that they do it. So I would say if you're considering them, vet them, understand what the key benefits of that service is, and also consider how complex your organization is, right? Because if you don't have a ton of moving parts, maybe one of the kind of like, maybe like a Dmartian is a better fit for you. Whereas if you really are a very complex organization with a lot going on, and there's lots of different mail streams coming from different places, maybe, somebody like a Valleymail would be better, even though they are more expensive, just because they've dealt with those kind of very complex setups in the past. But honestly, I would recommend all of them, because they all are very helpful and good people working behind them.
Thanks.
I know that we are past the hour, but if anyone wants to stay on, I'm going to ask a question that I've been holding on to the presentation. Let's talk a little bit about responsive emails. There's a lot of people saying you should spend the time to build out like a fully responsive template, and depending on what tool you use to send that email, like, and you need to do testing and tools like Litmus and whatnot. On your point of view, what kind of time should you put into a responsive email template? Does that affect deliverability at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does affect deliverability in the sense that if you have an audience that is mainly opening, clicking, engaging with your mail on their mobile device, their likelihood of engaging is probably higher if the email is responsive, right? If it looks good on their device, if it's easy for them to kind of enjoy that mail, that is, I think, really worth the time spent. And so yeah, it does have that impact on deliverability because it's affecting engagement, which is a huge driver for deliverability. But really, I would say look at your audience, try to dig into whatever data you have on your audience and figure out, are they opening and clicking? Are they converting on desktops? Like where is the activity happening? What destinations are they coming from? Kind of how tech savvy are they? Things like that. And I do think responsive is a good thing for everyone to do. But if it's going to take a lot of time to set up and kind of maintain, is that juice kind of worth the squeeze, sort of thing. So yeah, but this is true for a lot of things, right? There's AMP for email, there's annotations, there's BIMI that's coming up. There's all these different technologies. They're all cool, they're all fun, but I think that's where really consider the audience that you're sending to, because if that if that cool shiny thing hasn't been adopted within the destinations that you're sending to the most, it's not really worth it, right? So really kind of just consider that when you're putting together your program.
Very interesting. Anyone else? Any other attendees want to chime in or have a question or comment? Anyone dealing with any deliverability issues today? I mean, I'm gonna pick on someone, and it's gonna be the born with his camera on, Chris. I'm gonna pick on you because I know you. Tell me a deliverability issue that you're dealing with today.
I don't know. Our deliverability is like almost best in class. I mean, we're doing decently well. So I would say, I don't know, like the thing that resonated with me was kind of like the clickbait issue. You didn't exactly say that, but it's what you're alluding to. Like, don't craft these like clickbaity like subject lines and pretext, which then lead you to not want to click through. And that's why you have these like really low click-through rates. So I would say like, how do we improve our click-through rate slightly? And I know that's such a vague question because you're like, there's so many moving parts to it and there's so many like CTA aspects, but
yeah, I mean, I think one thing to do is really, this is a great place for testing because, like I was talking to someone recently who, who was like, our open rates are great, our content is awesome, everyone loves our content, but like no one's clicking through, and they're like, well, and when they do click through, they click on the first link. And so this was somebody who was basically sending like thought leadership or kind of educational content. It just basically was a little summary of the article and then a link to it, right? But what we found with that particular person was that they were using very vague subject lines that were kind of like, hey, here's your weekly update. And so people were opening because they liked the brand and they had liked some of their content in the past, but then they get in there and they're like, nah, none of this content is for me. And so one thing they could try, and they did try, was more specific subject lines, kind of breaking up that content. So instead of sending, one email with 6 links in it, they would send one with 2 links that were specific to a certain topic, and then have a subject line that was more tailored to that kind of content. And that seemed to have a better impact on their click-through rates. Obviously their open rates were lower, but it helped with their click-through rates because it was kind of lining that up. So I think it really is just test as much as you can, and try to follow those metrics.
Awesome follow-up question really fast. What's your stance on A/B testing? Is it like A/B test everything that goes out, or very strategically testing certain types of variables? And like, what's your stance on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't say A/B test everything. I focus on what you think is going to drive the biggest incremental changes. So like, that's where I think most people start with, like the open rates, the call to actions, things like that are kind of the most meaningful parts of the email. You could also you could also test like the from address. Like if you have one that's like, hey, Lauren from Socket Labs, versus one that's like just Socket Labs, that's my company name, right? So you could try testing a lot of that stuff. I think it's just make sure when you're testing that there's, that the results are significant enough, right? If you're testing on a very small population, like, if you're sending a test to 10 people and you're like, oh, that subject line won because 6 people clicked it versus 4, like that's not statistically relevant. So I think that's, just make sure that you're using a big enough sample size to really, understand, was this helpful or was this not? But yeah, test one thing at a time as well. Like, if you're testing, 2 completely different templates, but they have different call to actions, different open types of subject lines, different from addresses, like all these things. How do you know what affected the most change? You don't. So just test it incrementally, just kind of one change at a time to kind of see what really.
If you could only, last one, I swear, if you could only send one email for moving forward, plain text or HTML?
It depends on the audience. I would say if I had to choose, I would probably choose plain text because that will load properly for everybody and whatever. But yeah, depending on the brand, right? Figure if you're a retail brand and you're selling things that people can buy, they want to see pictures of the images of things they're going to buy, right? And maybe that really fancy template makes them feel better, right? But yeah, if I had to choose, I'd say plain text. But yeah, really depends on the content that you're sending.
Hi, Zoe here. I've got a question. It's about deliverability, specifically to France. A lot of emails that I send out get caught up in a blackmail filter, where you then have to go and verify each individual email or lead address. I mean, it's the only country or region. I'm based in EMEA, so I'm going across Europe and the whole EMEA region. Anybody else come across this issue in France? Is it a common issue?
Common issue globally. I don't think it's specific to France. Depends on the company's setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say,
with France.
Oh, go ahead.
I only have the problem with France. It doesn't seem to be any other country.
That is interesting to me, but I have seen differences where, specifically within France, like I was working for Mailjet in my past life, which is a French ESP. And so we were sending a lot of volume to Orange. We were sending quite a bit to SFR, the other, French destinations. And I don't want to say that their systems are more basic, but they generally are dealing with, they're a very small team on all of those companies, and they're mainly triggered by user complaints. And so if you're getting those queries about, hey, here's some recipients, go confirm whether they signed up, how they signed up. My sense is they're kind of questioning why your user complaint, almost like why you're having a higher percentage of like negative reactions than they'd like to see. So I would dig in on your list collection and your expectation setting, and really try to find ways to limit the.
Yeah, no, it's an automatic. It comes out in French. Verification required that. And some of the leads that it goes to, I know, are channel partners and customers, so they are verified in terms of the list and the quality of the list. It's just like an auto response, and for each one, they get collected in a shared inbox, and you just literally have to click on each one and verify them one by one, which could be anything between 50 and a couple of hundred per mailing.
Yeah. Yeah, I still think, it's one of those, like, it's, again, like mailbox providers they cannot tell if you have an opt-in program, if the addresses that you're sending to, they're just looking at data points. And so again, if they're challenging something about the validity of your addresses, I would really just dig into what other metrics you can look at that might indicate, some kind of an issue that says, hey, this is not opt-in mail, or this is not as legitimate as it claims to be.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Lauren, I had a question, quite an interesting one, which is, so our Marketo is like fully authenticated, but we are on a shared ID. We also have this DMARC project going on to kind of move us down that road. And an interesting one it's flagged is that we send out about 20,000 emails a day that are completely failing SPF and DKIM authentication. When we've tested these in random Google mailboxes, they all go into the mailbox fine, and Google kind of doesn't just say, oh yeah, these are in the junk filter, which you would expect for them failing that authentication. Do you know of any way to find out how things, how often things go into kind of the junk mail filters, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know how often they're falling in. I mean, I think that's, we don't get feedback that says mail is going to the spam folder. They literally just tell you when it fails, right? So for DMARC, if the mail is failing authentication, then you get a report that kind of tells you about it. But yeah, they're not going to tell you if the mail goes really to the spam folder or the inbox. So with the authentication pieces, you can dig into the email headers and try to understand why the mail is failing, and maybe work with your providers to fix that, right? Like, figure for DMARC to work, you just need to have either SPF passing or DKIM passing, and usually providers can work with you to get at least one to be passing. So I mean, maybe that's the next step forward, is identifying why is there a misconfiguration that's causing this mail to fail.
Yeah, and also another side benefit I've just noticed is these tools that move you down that pathway towards kind of greater authentication are super helpful at kind of an enterprise level for understanding what systems are sending out, because we do find kind of rogue systems, and we're like, oh, have you not configured this system? And the PR people are like, oh, we didn't think we had to configure anything. And I've just found a report saying like, oh, a HubSpot email went out. And I'm like, we don't use HubSpot, we use Marketo. So who the hell is using HubSpot, kind of thing?
Right.
So it's a really kind of, it's a very technical area, but I do think it's such a helpful area for all of us to be looking at.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think that's, it's, DMARC has its benefits to protect your mail and, from spoofing and phishing and things like that. But really, I think it's the exercise itself, because it really is just having to identify every single mail stream you have. And then of course you're working to improve the authentication, which of course helps your deliverability in the long run. So yeah, it's a great, if you can get through it and not pull all your hair out, I think it's a great thing to work towards.
I think on the Marketo side, just to add to that, to get very specific on Marketo, you've got your smart lists, which are the email bounced, and you've got the details in which you can put in reason codes. So you can do the contained within that will give you the number that are bounced. If you really wanted to monitor the number of times it was happening, I guess you could have a scoring element that looks at particular details of bounce reason codes as well. That might enable you, even if it was just simply an export of just that column and then adding it up, then you'll have the number of that many times that happens. So you can use that within your smart lists in Marketo.
This has been a very interesting session today. I want to thank you, Lauren, for joining. I know it's an early day in California for you. And thank you for everyone else joining us from across Europe and across the world. I know Chris is dialing in from Boston. Warren, as always, pleasure co-leading this with you. Anything else to add, Warren, before we wrap up?
No, I think thank you so much, Lauren. I really appreciate you joining us in our European group.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's a great time, and yeah, I hope it was helpful.
Right. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.